This morning, how many of you have heard the phrase, can't see the forest for the trees before? We understand that concept. The picture on the left, when you are in the forest, you can't see much. You can't see very far. You don't really know where you're at. But when you step up high, when you get to that 30,000-foot view, when you're in the airplane driving over these massive forests in the east part of the nation or out west, you just see trees upon trees, and you see the hills and the creeks and the rivers. This phrase is just a picture, this concept that you can be so in the details in something of life that you don't see the bigger picture. And it happens to all of us. It's easy as a parent to be so in the details of your child who didn't put their shoes away where they belonged, and they didn't clean up their dishes after the meal, and they forgot their lunchbox when they went to school, and this and that, and you're like, they're forgetting everything, that you forget to step out and say, you know what? This kid is growing up. This kid is maturing. This child is actually taking steps. And you don't appreciate the big picture growth and maturity that the child's taking when you're constantly just harping on all the details. Or at work, you can be such a perfectionist that you care about every single fine-tooth detail on a project that the company doesn't even really care about. It's small potatoes, and then you're not spending your time on something that's much bigger and much more profitable because you're just looking through the weeds, through the details, and you're not seeing big picture, what does the company care about? In the church, it's really easy to get so focused on, I don't really like the music, or they made the changes at the church, or that kid was running in the stairwell, and you miss the big picture maybe that you're seeing that a church is growing and maturing, and maybe that kid who wouldn't normally have been at this church 6 months ago is now coming to church every single month. And so we get into the details, and we tend to be complainers in the details. We miss the big picture. We miss the better things that are going on. I think, sadly, this is also what happens to a lot of Christians when we read the Bible. You get into the details of a singular story, and you're like, okay, I see what's going on in this story, and then the next day maybe you read another story, or you come and you listen to a sermon, and you're starting to collect all these stories in your repository we call your brain, but you have no idea how any of them fit together. It's like every time you read the Bible or every time you hear a sermon, it's just one more photo or snapshot, but you have now all these photos of all these different people and all these characters in the Bible, but you don't actually understand how do they fit? Who are these people? What is the order? And what does it all mean? And that's what we're going to tackle in this series that we're kicking off today, where we're going to walk through the Bible as God's love story, where He is the main character, and He is allowing His love to flow out of Him towards us, His creation. And I hope that at the end of this series, you have a much better idea of how the entire Bible fits together as one big whole. You see, the Bible's written in 66 books by over 40 different authors. And so if you don't understand it, or if you just start in Genesis and start reading straight through, you will end up confused because it's not written in chronological order. And so there is a part of this where you have to kind of have a big overarching narrative understanding, like a hanger. If you have a bunch of hangers, but you don't actually have the pole to hang them on to put them in the right order, you're not sure how things fit. And so as we go through this story, I'm going to tell you the story of the Bible as one cohesive whole, from beginning to end, how God has been working through humanity and what your life, how it fits with everything else that goes on in the pages of Scripture. I hope this helps you be a better Christian and learn what it means to live out your faith, because you see yourself better in the picture of what God is doing in His mega love story through all time. And so today we have to start where all love stories start, and that's at the very beginning. If you want to open your Bible to Genesis chapter 1, that's where we are going to be reading from today. The word Genesis, it's the first chapter of our Bible, and it's a Hebrew word that comes from the word for origins. So Genesis is really the origin story of everything. It tells us specifically about our original relationship with God and how he came to pour out his love on all of us, that we are created not just like the animals, like the earth, not just part of, what's the word I'm looking for, where everything evolves, evolution. We are created on purpose by a God who loves us. We were created for love. And this single truth is something that you may not feel in the day-to-day, that God created you for his love because you're living in the forest, you're living in the trees, you're living with all the details of life, all the challenges, all the worries, all the to-dos on your to-do list. And so God feels very distant. But I hope that as we go through this series, and especially this message, you realize that there are moments where you need to step back and take that 30,000-foot view and see how God's love truly has been poured out on all of us. So when we go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the first 4 words in most of our Bibles, in the beginning, God. And we're going to stop right there. Everything starts with God. There is no creative story about where God comes from. I remember as a kid wondering, but where's God come from? Who created God? If there is a source or a being who created God, that person or source by definition would have more power than God and would be God. For God to be God, he has to be eternal. He has no beginning. There is no creation of God. The story of all origins just begins with the fact that God exists. He always is, always has been. He's eternal. We continue in that verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. More than being just eternal, another aspect of God's character is shown here, and that's that he is transcendent. You see, there are some religions that believe that God is creation. They talk about Mother Earth. You've heard of Mother Earth before, right? This idea that the source of God and love is actually one with creation. The Bible makes it very clear. God is separate from his creation. The word here is transcendent. God transcends. He is apart from, he is above his creation. There is God and there is the created. So right here in the very first verse of the Bible, we learn a lot about God. First, that he's eternal. Second, that he is transcendent. He is outside of his creation. However, the eternal and transcendent God had a plan as this thing gets started, and that was to create a home, a place for what was going to become his new and beloved people. So God started creating in a very deliberate way. Many of you may be familiar with creation as described in Genesis chapter 1. 6 days of creation, and on the 7th day he rested. But maybe you have never before seen the incredible order that takes place in the creation story. On day 1, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he says, let there be light. And there was light, and he separates the light from the darkness. So on day 1, basically, we have all of the universe kind of rolled out and opened up, and the earth put inside, and there is light and there is darkness. And then on day 2, when you read through it, it gets a little jumbled. I don't have the words on the screen. He said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate the water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the waters above it, and it was so. We now understand we have an atmosphere. If we didn't have an atmosphere around our earth that holds in the clouds and the moisture and the gases that we have, we wouldn't be able to have life. And so that whole verse is describing creating the waters on the earth and the waters above our atmosphere. But it's still empty. Next, on day 3, he creates dry ground. He said he pushes the waters on the earth into their spots, and dry ground rises up. He calls the dry ground land. He calls the water seas. And then he looks at the dry ground and he covers it. And he covers it with plants and trees that bear fruit and nuts, it specifically calls out. And so what we have is a beautiful, beautiful home. A place for living creatures to flourish, but there are not yet any living creatures. What we see in these first 3 days in that top row is that God created a place to call home, but he hasn't yet filled the home. And then he fills it in the same order by which he created. On day 4, he looks at the heavens and he fills it with the planets and the stars. And there's 2 great lights to govern our days on earth, the sun and the moon. And he said he's given those to us to give us days and years, and so that we can map out sacred times. So God's giving us order so that we can even plan out our lives. He's preparing all that by filling the celestial heavens above us. Day 5, he fills the waters on earth with fish and sea creatures. He fills the sky above with birds. And then day 6, he creates what he calls livestock and wild animals and small creatures that scurry along the ground. He creates all the animals and the insects and the bugs and the snakes, and all of that ends up on dry ground. And then finally, after doing all that on day 6, he creates humanity. And he puts humans on the earth. And at the end of every one of these days, it always ends with, and it was good. But on Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, the last verse of chapter 1, God steps back on day 6. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. We've got this perfect picture where God is saying, you know what? I have done what I set out to do. In his creative being, he orchestrated something through incredible order and deliberate steps to create the home and then fill the home, to create the place and then fill it with people. What I also love about this is the order really, really matters. You cannot create, say, the creatures that live on the dry ground if you have not yet created a food source in plants and in trees. This had to be a very intentional order. And a quick side note, for your own lives, you have to understand God knows the order of your life that matters. He knows what needs to happen before something else can occur. And while it might be really hard to trust God with the steps of your life, trust his ordering. There are times in your life where you may not want to wait. You may say, God, why am I going through this difficult time? Even in creation, what we see is God knows the steps and the order that things need to happen in. If he goes in a different order, there's chaos and things don't work. He knows the steps that your life needs to take. And if you skip a step, you're going to have chaos and things aren't going to work. So we need to trust God knows better than we do. So we need to trust his ordering. Sometimes we need to wait. Sometimes we need to say, I don't know why I'm going through this, but I'm going to trust this is here because something else is going to follow. And this was important for whatever is coming next. But that is an aside. All right, so I want to zoom in now to where this love story truly begins. And that is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. So here we see that God's love isn't necessarily for all of creation the exact same way. It's not equal. All of creation, what we see, was actually for the pinnacle of his creation. And that was humanity. So where this entire chapter goes really quickly, day to day to day, We get to day 6, and it moves just like the rest of the days, where he creates the livestock and the wild animals and the small creatures that scurry along the ground. But then we come to a place where there's dialogue suddenly in verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all creatures that move along the ground." This story here completely slows down. The details begin to be filled in. It's obvious that mankind is different than everything that's come before. There's something special here. It's talking about being made in the image of God, in his likeness. Nothing else on this earth is made in God's image. Nothing else mirrors his likeness. In verse 27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So mankind is created in the image of God, male and female, both in the image of God. This is important. We live in a world right now where gender is kind of thrown around and confused. Right in the creation story, we see this is part of God's design. And he does not make one gender more important than another. He does not say, men, you rule over, you dominate, you are more important, you are more valued. Men and women, male and female, both created in the image and likeness of God. We have divine value, every single one of us, no matter how you feel about yourself, no matter what people at school are saying about you, or how your family is treating you, doesn't change the fact that God sees you in a very special way. God sees you as a person with dignity, a person worthy of his love, a person that he specifically made as an image bearer of himself, to represent himself on this earth. And that goes for you and also every person you can't stand. Also has the imprint of the image of God on them. The homeless person who's drugged out, and you're like, why can't they just figure out their own lives? That person has the image of God stamped on them. The immigrant, the image of God on their lives. Your political enemy, whatever side of the aisle you're on, they're not just an enemy, and I wish they'd just go away. They are created by God, loved by God, in the image of God. This is part of where I get frustrated with the political climate of our nation right now, is because we are demonizing and vilifying the other side, and we are forgetting that while we may greatly disagree with them, we are dehumanizing, and we are making them less than what they truly are. Every person who has breath, no matter how awful their ideas might be, is still made in the image of God and has dignity and worth. And we cannot forget that, or we start to lose a piece of our humanity and what makes us image bearers. Then in verse 28, it says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. At this point, we get what is often referred to as the cultural mandate. It's the first place where God gives humanity what our purpose is on this earth. Be fruitful, multiply, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over it. That's what we are called to do. We essentially are put on this earth to be stewards of this earth, to enjoy it, to love it, to say, God, thank you for that sunset. It was absolutely glorious. Thank you for the fog as it drifts through those hills. It's beautiful. Thank you for the moon, for the goldfinch, for the hummingbird, for the monarch butterfly. There is so much beauty, and we are created and put in this earth to appreciate it. But more than that, it's to subdue and rule over, to care for it, to steward it. God's gifted us this incredible home, and that doesn't mean we can do whatever we want with it and just make a disaster of it. We shouldn't be just polluting it and saying, well, we don't really care. Like, this is a home and we're called to take care of it. As farmers, it's important to manage the land and to do what's best for the land so that it continues to produce. That's responsible agriculture. And as we live, some people literally roll their window down after eating at McDonald's and throw their bag out the window of their car. I have seen this happen before in my life, and I am blown away by this. You would think, is this Ryan just getting upset because he's got a bugaboo and this is one of them? No. I went to seminary, and when I went to seminary, it was the first time I realized God actually cares about our environment. He is eco-friendly. Now, how we take that, that's all up to us to work out. But we can't just say God doesn't care. He does. This is his home. This is that he made for us. This is my Father's world. This is what he created for all of us to appreciate. And so we should care about what he made for us. We shouldn't just say none of that matters. Now, obviously, these are very complicated issues, so I'm not up here to tell you exactly how to parse this out, but what I am telling you is God cares about the environment. So don't throw your McDonald's out your window. Okay, if you're ever thinking of doing that, remember, Pastor Ryan says that's a sin. Makes God very sad. Right? But this is something that we can tease out of this passage. God cares, and so we should care as a result. We should want to make this earth better than how we found it. When Michelle and I bought the property that we purchased, one of the things that I said is, I want to leave it better than I found it. 50 years of letting cows go wherever they want and eat all the best stuff and leave nothing but the worst things, we can do better than that. And so part of our mission on that land isn't just for ourselves, but we believe God actually cares that we leave the land better than how we purchased it. So, moving on, stepping back out of the forest, so to speak, or out of the trees. The process that we have seen unfold as we walked through Genesis chapter 1 in this origin story of God's love is that he first created a perfect place. Then an image-bearing people. And finally, he gave us a divine purpose. Days 1 through 3, he's creating the place. On day 6, he creates us, but he doesn't create us like everything else where he just says, and he created this and he created this. It slows down, and it says, and he said, shall we create, I'm lost my words. I want to get them right. Let us make mankind in our image. He decides, I'm going to do this. So he makes us in his image. That shows we are separate, we are different, we are beloved. And then he gives us that purpose in verse 28. Subdue, rule over, fill, multiply. And at this point, it's only natural to ask why. Why did God make us any different than any of the animals? Why does God give us a purpose and say, you are the ones who get to rule over everything else. You are the ones who are called to subdue the land, to create farming and all these things, technologies that we have developed in this planet to manage the world all around us. A big part of that is us fulfilling the cultural mandate. It truly is. And as you keep reading in chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis, what you see is that God is very present with Adam and Eve, the first people on earth. When he sits with Adam and he has Adam name the animals however he wants, but Adam can't find a suitable helper. So God literally gets into the dust of the earth and he takes a rib from Adam's side and he makes Eve. And then, even after the sin, we see that God is walking through the garden looking for Adam and calling out to him. We see that God, while we already talked about God is transcendent, he is above and he is outside of his creation, there's another word, he is also immanent. An immanent God means that he is close. He is near, and he wants to be present. And so we have to hold these two things in tension. Some people view God as just the transcendent God. He's like the divine watchmaker who made everything a long time ago, and he set it in motion, and now he doesn't care about anything. And other people see God so immanently that it's Mother Earth, and he's in the middle of everything. And when you pluck a flower, you're plucking God out of the ground. Neither of those are accurate. God lives in the tension here. He is over and above creation, but he is among us. He is present with us, and he wants a perfect relationship with the very first people he created, Adam and Eve. That's why he set them in a garden. That was always his desire. But let's look at what the Apostle Paul writes to the Ephesians. He actually sheds some light on what happened before Genesis chapter 1. In Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4 and 5, it says, "Even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes. God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure." You see, the God of the universe, maker of heaven and earth, could have done anything with his majestic power, was so filled with love that he chose, before he ever created a thing, he wanted an object of his affection. He wanted a people that he could love, that he could dote on, that he could just give us his abundance. That was always his plan. It's like when you get married and you have this desire to say, I want to bring a baby into this world. I want a child that I can love and care for and raise, and I can just like pour myself into. That's essentially what God was feeling. He wanted that love that was overflowing out of him to have somebody to receive that love. And so before he ever made the world, he had you in mind. He had me in mind. He had the people you can't stand in your life in mind. And he wanted all of us to receive his perfect love. He wanted to be present among us all. So he prepared a perfect home, and he filled it with absolutely everything that people would ever need to flourish. And then he created the first humans, made to represent him and to be just like him. And he gave us a divine purpose so that we could be in relationship with him and we could manage the home that he's given us. And finally, he showed us that he wants to be in relational presence with us. He didn't just give us a home to say, there you go, I hope you're happy. But he's always wanted relationship with us. So that's where the opening chapter of the Bible leaves us. And at this point, you might be wondering, what happened? That is not the world we live in, where we have a beautiful, flourishing home, where everything's perfect, where we have this relationship with God, where we just walk and talk with him, and it's absolutely perfect, and we have no problems, and we just recognize the glory of God all around us. Well, you see, what happened is what we'll talk about next week, okay? I'm not going to give away next week. But what we do understand is that even today, we do still see glimpses of this story. We see little pieces of beauty. We see little pieces of love breaking through. We recognize, even the person who's like, no, as humans, there's nothing better about us than any living creature. I think any of us who look at it logically go, no, there is something intrinsically different about us than any other living creature. That's called the image of God. It's described in Genesis chapter 1. So we see glimpses of all of Genesis chapter 1 breaking through. Unfortunately, our world lacks clarity on a lot of it, and Satan likes to twist these truths. And so now we live in a world where the value of life is questioned, where people feel like genders can be chosen, and so they don't want to identify their child with a gender until their child's old enough to pick their own gender. Men and women struggle with one another for power. Men have ruled over women for a long time. Feminists have come along and are trying to vie that power away. And men and women are wrestling for power. Humanity has no clear idea of our purpose on this earth. And so we war with one another and we chase things that we maybe shouldn't be chasing. All because we don't truly understand or we don't believe what God set up for us in Genesis chapter 1. He established us to be his people whom he loves. We've made a mess of it, yes. And the worst part of it all is that some people have completely walked away from God. What he cares most about is that relational presence. And so many people live in the world and he's given them the purpose, but they don't want to have any presence with him whatsoever. And that's what grieves God's heart the absolute most. If we can understand God and his intentions from this love story, it will help us find our way in this complicated life. I'm sure there's a few things that I've said today that you've heard it and you've understood the implications of what that means for your life and how you can take that and use it in how you live, more than just not throwing your McDonald's out the window. It's when we step out of the trees of life that we can more clearly see the forest, the bigger picture, the one God has been trying to show you all along. And that's that he created you to be the object of his affection. You were created for love. I hope you'll come back next week to hear what went wrong that made this thing a giant mess, and God's been trying to right it ever since. Would you bow your heads with me as we pray?